Yesterday, Kenya witnessed one of the most consequential by-elections for both the ruling party, that is United Democratic Alliance, and the disunited opposition that have previously been united until these by-elections. But of course, 48 to 24 hours prior to those particular by-elections, we also saw things that happened in different constituencies that were actually really not kind to certain participants in this particular by-election. Today, in this particular episode, the People's Mirror, we just want to recap the winnings that have since been made public out of the 24 stations that had their by-elections yesterday, and also we'll make a commentary, or rather slight comments, on what happened in key polling stations that were holding this by-elections yesterday that were actually really not kind, and that the IBC should take a look at moving into the main elections in 2027. So if you're joining the People's Mirror for the first time, ladies and gentlemen, we have this desire to hit 1,000 mark by the end of this week, and so kindly just hit the subscribe button to aid us in that challenge journey. Now let's delve right into this particular by-election. So yesterday we did not record here the People's Mirror because we took an observer look on what was going on across all the 24 stations. And of course there were certain stations that prior to even the elections being done, like Malava, Kabuchai, Ber North and Kasipul, there were incidences of violence. And so we will measure on them later, but first let us report to you the ones that have since been confirmed. And if they will be contested now, they will only be contested in legal platforms and cannot be contested within the IBC doctrines anymore. First is the hugely contested Ber North seat. You remember this seat, we said that the gap in the previous elections that detailed this particular constituency all the way from 2002 to 2022 has not been bigger than 700 votes between the winning candidate and the second candidate. Now, as per the website, the IBC website, where the right tally was taking place during the counting of these particular votes, you would notice that the difference between the winning candidate in Ber North and the second candidate is now 402 votes, and this falls within the 200 to the 700 gap votes that we said has always been the results from Ber North. Now Ber North has gone to Leonard Wamudende Njeru is declared to have won 15,819 votes of the electorates that showed up to votes, and Newton Karish is second with 15,417 votes. So if you do a calculation, you'll find the difference between Leonard Wamudende Njeru and Newton Karish, as per these particular results of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission's website, is just a difference of 402 votes, falling within that particular analysis that we did when we started taking a look at the by-elections in Ber North. And then you move to Malava. We will come back and recap the issues that existed around this particular by-elections, but first let us just give the results as they are. You go to Malava, Ndakwa has won with 22,389 votes. Ndakwa comes from the United Democratic Alliance Party, which is the ruling party right now, and so they have won again Malava's by-elections with 22,389 votes, leaving Seth Panyako second with 20,910 votes. So that's also another place where the difference between the winning candidate and the second candidate has not exceeded 1,500 votes. Shows you how tight that race was, and we'll come and take a look at what happened prior to this election that dictated these results. So safe to say, these two particular stronghold points that we put as the major testing grounds ahead of the 2027 elections in our previous analysis ahead of this particular by-elections being held have all gone to the United Democratic Alliance Party. And Ber North and Malava were very sensitive areas that we were detailing, would have determined a lot the strength of the United Opposition and the strength of the United Democratic Alliance. And now we see that these two regions, as per the results of these by-elections from the IBC, have all gone to the United Democratic Alliance Party, that is UDA. Then there is Baringo. Baringo is Chemitei Kiprono, that Baringo was having a senatorial by-election, and Chemitei Kiprono has won it with 44 4,000 votes, 829. This was also the UDA candidate. So 3 so far have been won by the UDA candidate, being senatorial positions and the by-elections in the constituency levels. And then you go to Banisa constituency. Ahmed Maalim Hassan has won that particular by-election to become the new member of parliament for Banisa, replacing the previous gentleman who succumbed to a motorcycle accident. And Banisa's candidate, Mr. Ahmed Maalim Hassan, has now won with 10,451 votes. Then you go to Magarini, where Harrison Kombe was contesting it against Stanley Kenga Karisa. And Harrison Kombe was the sitting MP, and Stanley Kenga Karisa was the individual that felt that his votes were stolen in the previous elections. And so after the Supreme Court held in his favor, Mr. Karinga was again in this race against Mr. Garama Harrison. And Mr. Garama Harrison of the ODM party has since secured that seat. You go to Ugunja. Ugunja also was having a by-elections as a result of the ousting of Honorable Opiyo Wandayi from the constituency seat to serve in the cabinet. And so the candidate that Mr. Wandayi was fronting, an ODM candidate called Moses Omondi, has since taken the lead in Ugunja. He was formerly the CDF chairperson of Ugunja, so he has very close links with the current CS, who was the former MP of that region, Opiyo Wandayi. And so Moses Omondi becomes the member of parliament of Ugunja under the ODM ticket. Kasipul was also a very contested seat, and it's one of the seats that we will detail within this very episode that also had a lot of violence, including the member of parliament for Homa Bay town constituency, Opondo Kaluma, who actually attended as an ODM agent in the Kasipul primaries, was actually thoroughly beaten and left bleeding. So Kasipul, after those minimal violence that was witnessed, has now chosen Boyd Were, the son of Ngondo Were, as their member of parliament. And Boyd Were allegedly has won with 16,000 plus votes, beating Aroko Otete, who came second with 8,000 votes. Even before these particular results were announced, the third contestants in this race, Mani Bior, had conceded and jumped ship to congratulate Mr. Boyd Were even before these results came out. So it was a clear indicator even before the announcements were made that Boyd was having a strong lead from the time that these votes were being counted in Kasipul area in Homa Bay County. We will detail that shortly again on the violence that ensued. But let's go to Kariobangi North. Kariobangi North also, there was a tight competition between the DCP party, the ODM party, the KANU party, and the Jubilee party. And now the Kariobangi North election contestation has now gone to the DCP party. This becomes the first seat that the DCP party has clinched to have a member of parliament now in the National Assembly coming from Kariobangi North. Kabuchai constituency was not having a constituent by-election, but the Chwele ward within Kabuchai was having a ward by-election, and it was hugely contested. It almost claimed the life of Honorable Natembeya. Now, in this hotly contested seat between Natembeya's independent candidate Wekesa Eric and the Ford Kenya candidate that belongs to the party, or rather that's the party which belongs to the current Speaker of the National Assembly, were battling it down in Chwele ward in Kabuchai. And since then, Wekesa Eric has won that particular seat to become the new MCA of Chwele ward in Kabuchai. DCP has also had some wins in Kisa East and also in Narok Town Ward, where Rigathi Gachagua actually showed up in full gear because it was a very contested area. You remember, Rigathi was blaming Ntutu and Ruto for making Narok an hostile place. And now you can say that even if the Democracy for Citizens Party has not clinched more seats in, other than the Kariobangi North constituency seat and the Kisa Ward and the township seat, this is a congratulation to them for penetrating the Rift Valley backyard of the UDA party and now implanting an MCA in the Narok town seat. Now, with that update aptly given of what has transpired out of these particular elections in the past 24 hours, ladies and gentlemen, that the counting was being done, the tallying was being done, and now the IBC has reported. Let us take a look at what happened 48 to 24 hours prior to this announcement around these particular stations to put to rest the by-elections that have since had their results being announced. And that way, we start with Ber North. Now, yesterday at Ber North, some things that we ought to have recorded, but we did not record because of the observing nature that we took with the People's Mirror yesterday to actually really see how these particular by-elections were being done and whether or not they reflected how the 2027 elections will be done. Something interestingly happened. The head of MCA caucus for all the UDA MCAs in Kenya was actually an agent in Ber North. And when he showed up, that honorable MCA was wearing the UDA colors. So we had like a yellow jacket as part of the agents that were actually witnessing whatever was happening in Ber North. And so in a melee or a small fracas, the current Democratic Party leader, Justin B. Muturi, approached the gentleman and asked him to step out of the polling station. And the reason why JB Muturi did this was to ensure that the voters were not allured by the premises or the presence of UDA colors when they walked in to vote. And so JB Muturi was seen in various instances in Ber North yesterday having a one-on-one altercation with the gentleman and yet another gentleman who he felt was selling the UDA ideas around the polling stations. So up to around 10 p.m. in the night, the updates that were coming from the polling stations that had been received, up to around 121 out of all the 134 polling stations that were in Ber North, were actually depicting that Newton Karish was ahead with around 876 votes. And so, this made sense because the gap of 876 votes narrows down back to actually the gap that has been the history with the Ber North by-election. And what did we see? Shortly after that, there was allegation that Honorable Ruku alongside the security details stormed into Chicago in one of the polling stations in Chicago and opened fire. So there was a gentleman that was shot yesterday, a gateman who was shot in one of the polling stations in Ber North during this melee in a place called Gitubai, if I got it right. And shortly after this melee ensued and some ballot boxes were actually burned, we saw the wind shifting quickly from Newton Karish to Leonard Wamudende Njeru. And the UDA party did not take a break with it. Immediately they saw that this particular fracas had turned to a win of the other candidate. They congratulated the candidate immediately. Now, congratulating a candidate immediately actually has the effect of stemming the authority of that candidate, but from the political party's arrangement. So from the UDA party, they had actually secured that win. And so we saw Rigathi Gachagua tweeting about it, the involvement of Ruku and the guards in that particular station. We also saw JB Muturi taking the position that they are actually going to go to court with strong election petitions this morning because of how that particular election was carried out. But you see, every fight that exists on how election is carried out post the announcement of the candidate now becomes just another hurdle and another task. For most Kenyans and for most people, election ends when the candidate is announced. And so when Honorable Leo Wamudende was announced, even if there would be any actions coming from the united opposition after that, that stemmed that particular position. Now the question would be, what would have shifted the mindset of the Ber North people overnight to vote for Wamudende, even if after Gachagua had stemmed his camp in this area for over 10 days? It narrows down to the biblical fight of David and Goliath that Kindiki was talking about. And so perhaps with just one sling being Ber North and one stone being Leonard Wamudende, Kindiki has had a chance to demystify the influence of Rigathi Gachagua as a Goliath in this area and also to secure a seat for him in the arrangement that they have now with President Ruto post 2027. So Ber North has played well for the UDA party, but certain evils happened because if you take a look at the X platform, Billy Mwangi, who is also fronting himself as a senatorial candidate for the major elections in 2027 for the Embu area, displayed and showed pictures of individuals that were actually bribing voters to vote in favor of Wamudende, and they confiscated up to around 18,000 from an old man who was actually paying voters. And so the questions around it is this: whether or not there was voter bribery, which is actually a very, very bad thing in light of the capability of the IBC to run these elections, the major questions remains: if this voter bribery occurred and the people voted in line with the voter bribery, who should we blame? Should we blame the people? Should we blame the briber? Or should we blame the harsh economic times? Because put yourself in the shoes of someone in Ber North who has never had water access in their homes, does not have electricity access in their homes. I saw the speaker donating mattresses, or perhaps did not even have a mattress to sleep in prior to this by-election. And then a by-election comes, there is mattress offered to them, there is 1,000 bob given to them in, I'd say, daily basis. How would you expect this particular voter to vote? Because if this particular empowerment that has been given to Ber North in the past few weeks and the past few months gearing towards this particular by-election was not anything to go by, then you can put yourself in the shoe of that voter who has not touched 1,000 bob for quite some time and now gets an access to touch that 1,000 bob. And so it's even depicted the image of the Kenyan voter ahead of 2027, that for most Kenyan voters, the issue is now. How can I address now and deal with the rest later? When you promise such a voter, developments, roads, and whatever will come after an election, and they already have mattresses, food, and cash in their hands at the moment, the Kenyan voter, most likely from what we are seeing in Ber North, if the Ber North people voted Lewa Mudende in that numbers, then it seems that the Kenyan voter is more concerned about now. And so moving into 2027, politicians who do not have money geared towards their end might find it very difficult going against politicians who have stacked money for 2027. But if the Mbere people voted alternatively for Newton Karish overwhelmingly, and their votes have since not found the voice of the electorate, but has been shifted because of the power dynamics that play around Ber North, then we call upon the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission to gear up ahead of the main election so that that does not happen, so that a repeat of what might have happened in Ber North, being the control or influence of power, do not become what controls the 2027 elections. Because without saying it much, this particular by-elections ought to have been a clear reflection of how the 2027 major elections will play. Away from Ber North and whatever happened, Malava was also a very distasteful scene 48 hours prior to these elections. Seth Panyako's hotel was actually stormed into by goons who had machetes and guns and everything, and they destroyed the hotel. They were looking for Seth Panyako. They put the family in anguish for some time, and Mr. Panyako, who had since been evacuated because of the intelligence that arrived that certain people were coming baying for his blood, was not in the scene. But shortly after the following day, Mr. Panyako was arrested on the eve of his own elections, was making very sad statements, blaming now not President Ruto but the Kalenjin and the Nandi community for playing with this particular by-elections to restore power to that particular one community. Mr. Panyako, who was really disgusted with the way these particular elections were carried out and whose cars were destroyed, and who did not even have a platform on that very day to stand up and hold on for himself, still garnered around 20,910 votes, showing the desire of the Malava people to overrule the government influence in this area. But because while Panyako was going through all this and is in a cell and having humiliations from whatever had gone on with his hotel and his family, Ndakwa was under the protection of the state and was receiving all the information he required to coordinate his election that time. So we don't know whether or Malava people voted Ndakwa overwhelmingly. If we trust the IBC, then they did. And so even after Panyako going through all that humiliation, he gathered 20,910 against Ndakwa's 22,389, leaving a gap of less than 1,300 votes between the Ndakwa and Panyako. It shows you that the Malava people showed up vehemently to overturn the influence of the government in that region. And so because the numbers were high on the government side, or the influence was high on the government side, the government won. But the Luya one is different from the Ber North one. This Luya one shows a division between the Luya nations. One, a division towards unity of the Luhya nation being behind Seth Panyako, and then a division towards maintaining the status quo with the government being towards Ndakwa. And so this particular by-election really shows how 2027 is going to play out. Whether or not the UDA party will have control over this area, it also shows that the people will also show up in larger numbers if they did not show up in large numbers in this previous one, to also have the win geared or given to the people. Baringo and Banisa did not have much, because Baringo's candidate after Gideon Moi left, the Chemitei guy, did not have much of a competition. If you look at Banisa, it's the individual that is still facing citizenship allegations for actually not being a Kenyan and being a foreigner, really, not even having dual citizenship of Kenya and British, but a complete foreigner having Somalian citizenship and the British, and is only a resident of Kenya, became the MP in Banisa. And this was very interesting, because when Mr. Hassan Maalim went to vote himself, the Nation Television reported that the Kim's kit did not reflect his fingerprints, and this just heavies on the conversations that have been going on, that perhaps he's a foreigner and he does not have any recognition with the within the Kenyan systems. But as fate would have it, Banisa constituency has now elected Mr. Ahmed Maalim Hassan with 10,451 votes, even if the allegations of citizenship are still a live matter in court. Magarini was interesting because Harrison Kombe stole from Stanley Karisa Kenga's previous election as per the holding of the Supreme Court. And now overwhelmingly, because Magarini had been a point where the United Opposition had hinted that the Governor Mungaro was actually having a different arrangement with the presiding officers, and we detailed it before this particular by-elections were had. And now it turns out that Harrison Kombe has now secured that seat lawfully under the ODM party ticket. And now Stanley Kenga Karisa has to wait until 2027 to ask the people of Magarini again whether or not they will support him in the major elections. But as it stands right now, that particular seat has since gone to Mr. Harrison Kombe, who was previously holding that seat under the ODM party ticket. Ugunja has gone to Moses Omondi. As I had said, this was more clear because Opiyo Wandayi actually had vast interest in this individual, and this was Wandai's seat. So him leaving this seat to Mr. Moses Omondi was something that was not so contested. Then Kasipul, the last one for this particular episode. You see, Kasipul was really interesting. The reason why Kasipul was an interesting place is because there was an involvement or a division between the governor and the deputy governor on a candidate, and there was also a division between the UDA and the ODM party on a candidate. While these two parties formed the broad-based arrangement, they were fronting different candidates within the ODM, within the Kasipul power structure. And so it turns out that Boyd Were, the son of the late Ngondo Were, even after being calm in the face of chaos when Honorable not so honorable Kaluma was being beaten. Actually, Kaluma was thoroughly beaten. Actually, he showed up, he was trying to make a fake relationship or friendship with Aroko. Aroko called him aside a bit and gave chance to Aroko's boys to fully harvest him, and they left him bleeding. And while Honorable now Boyd Were was making statements of calling for peace and calm in the region, you would hear Kaluma from the background trying so much to have Boyd speak that the people attacked Kaluma directly, and Boyd evaded any statements of attacking Kaluma. He kept that the elections were actually peaceful in that particular area, and that is also the same thing that Otete Aroko kept all the way to the end of the elections. Now, the elections that people saw would have turned out very violently ended with this candidate, the son of Ngondo Were, now being the people's choice and the ODM's choice of that area, and Otete Aroko, who was also enjoying the support of Magwanga and the UDA party and the people, does not now have a voice in Kasipul anymore. And so Boyd Were, after Mr. Kaluma was beaten, kind of had a sacrifice from the ODM party for his win, and is currently the member of parliament elect for Kasipul constituency. Ladies and gentlemen, that is just the first recap that we have done for you on the results that have since reached the IEBC portal without any contestation as they have been reported. But throughout the day, we will keep our lenses on anything that arises, any allegations of foul play, and any more results that could be coming from the county levels and the ward levels that also happened yesterday. Keep it the people's mirror so that as they happen, we mirror them them for you here for your own consumption. And if you're joining or you're watching our videos for the first time, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button.